So thank you very much to Links for inviting me back to speak. In November at Links 103, I talked about the rise of the internet since the mid-90s, linked into some key moments in Zen's history. And I finished off with 3 or 4 slides on AI. And what I'm going to do today is do a much deeper dive into the subject of AI, and in particular, look at the prospect of AI not just achieving a level of intelligence similar to our own, but far surpassing our level of intelligence and becoming super intelligent. Now, before I do that, I'm going to give a very quick overview of Zen for anyone who wasn't here in November. So we founded in 1995 in the early days of the internet, so we're 24 years old now, 520 staff. This is our headquarters in Rochdale. We've grown every year since we founded. We're profitable, which is great, and we won quite a number of awards for our service and also as an employer. And one of the things that we've got a big focus on is LLU. So as of today, we have 400 telephone exchanges live with our kit in. We have 50 which are just finishing build. In fact, some of those 50 now are live and have got services on. We've got another 50 in planning and commitment to go to 700. And that will give us 90% circa coverage for fibre broadband and about 2/3 for Ethernet. In terms of the services we provide, and stop press, last month we announced the opening of our second office in the city centre of Leeds, which we opened to expand our catchment area for the recruitment primarily of technical people. So in terms of the services we provide, about 3/4 of the business comes from broadband and phone lines, all the way from individual consumers up to FTSE 100 businesses and the public sector. And then we have a whole spectrum of other services. We've got a big focus on cloud based on our own infrastructure, which is Nutanix based. We do a lot with AWS, a little bit with Azure, IPVPNs, SD-WAN, wholesale access to LLU, and a number of other services. Our most fundamental long-term objectives in priority order are happy staff, happy customers, and happy suppliers. So these 3 objectives are the reason we exist as a business. And everything that we do, including making profit and investing and all those things that you've got to do, which are really important, should ultimately contribute to these people-centric objectives. So it's all about people first, money second at Zen. And it's a formula that's worked for us really, really well in the long term. Ironically, it's delivered fantastic financial return because we're making the right people-centric decisions for the long term. So a very quick snapshot about Zen, and let's now get straight into the subject of when AI becomes super intelligent. So I'm going to start off with a lead-in from a couple of the slides that I presented in November and then take it from there. And the starting point is Moore's Law. So Gordon Moore, in 1965, as one of the founders of Intel Corporation, predicted that the number of transistors on a chip will double every year. Now, in 1975, he revised that to every 2 years, the number of transistors on a chip will double. And he was looking out maybe 10 years in the future. But what we've actually found is that up to present day, Moore's Law has more or less remained true. And in fact, the record today held by Xilinx's Everest chip goes off this scale because it has circa 50 billion transistors on that chip. So, now the doubling is slowing ever so slightly. It's tending towards 3 years. But what is very clear, so certainly to me, I think probably to most people in this room, is that we can expect for some decades to come exponential growth in compute power, memory and storage, and bandwidth. And just one example of that, this one is from Cisco, of many examples. So Cisco, in this white paper, are predicting a 24% compound annual growth rate in overall internet traffic. And that equates to a doubling of internet traffic every 3 years and 2 months. Okay, so that's great. What does it mean for us, for society, for the world? And there's some really obvious stuff that it means. Even bigger TVs, even higher resolution TVs, even more streaming media over the internet. Okay, anyone can predict that. But actually, if you look further out, there are many things that are really difficult to predict. Look out 10 years from now, 2029, maybe 15 years, 2034. What do you think is going to happen then? If I look back to when we founded Zen in 1995, who could have predicted in 1995 the far-reaching changes to society and the way we do business that the internet has unlocked over the last couple of decades? I certainly couldn't, and I think most people couldn't. So who could have predicted things like cloud or social media or all the streaming services that we have today when we were dialing up with our modems back then? So if you look forward, it's pretty certain we're going to have at least as much change in the future and probably more change in the future that's equally difficult to predict. For everyone in this room, it's a good news story because it means continuous change, it means there's always new opportunities, of course it means there's new challenges as well. One thing I do predict though is not the development of AI as such, but the development of, well, let's call it RI, real intelligence within a computer. Maybe we should call it TI, true intelligence, or maybe we should just call it intelligence. So it is my view that we will, in the not too distant future, create true intelligence within a computer system. And we might even create a conscious computer. So let's look in detail at that, about what is consciousness and how we might create it. If you consider a robot and think that that robot behaves in all aspects identically to a human being, it's got the same logical response, it's got the same emotional response, it'd be quite difficult, I think, to argue that that robot or that machine wasn't conscious. And then you think, well, hang on a minute, just stop there, because surely there's more to consciousness than just this symphony of electrical signals that's dancing between our circa 100 billion neurons across about 1,000 trillion synaptic connections. There is more to that because we're alive, we feel, and we've got a sense of self, a soul, some would say. Maybe some magic that transcends the physical. And of course, these feelings are real. But the science says they're all created by the electrical signals within our brain. And in fact, not just all of our brain, but a very specific part of our brain. And that part of our brain is called the posterior hot zone, which exists in the posterior cortex. And what we found in the science is that when people have had brain injury or needed brain surgery, then people could have large areas of this grey bit damaged or removed, and yet, despite losing lots of capability, they still experience a conscious existence and that passage of time. However, if the damage happens here, the subject is permanently unconscious. Now, what you might say is, well, hang on, yeah, okay, I get that, but surely a computer that was programmed to behave like a human would just be a simulation. It wouldn't be real as such. It would be artificial. And I would say, no, I disagree with that, because when you think about simulations are computer models, very much simplified computer models of a very much more complex reality. And what we're talking about here is something different. We're talking about replicating reality in all its nuances and all its detail, and then taking it to the next level. So it's not a simulation, it absolutely is real. In terms of the debates on consciousness, there are two competing theories at the moment. One is called global neuronal workspace, and that says computers of the future will be conscious. The competing theory, integrated information theory, says programming for consciousness will never create a conscious computer. So, differences of opinion. Actually, does it really matter whether these machines are conscious according to the human definition of consciousness? And I would argue it doesn't matter, because actually what's more important than our definition of consciousness is surely how it actually thinks and what it actually does in the world, how it interacts with us and other life on Earth. The next big question is when. Okay, so let's look at that. When will it happen? Well, a couple of years ago, in fact 18 months ago, no, a couple of years ago, 352 AI experts were surveyed across the world. And they were given this definition of high-level machine intelligence. That's achieved when unaided machines can accomplish every task better and more cheaply than human workers. And the survey participants were asked to estimate the probability of that arriving in future years. And this is the result of that. Now, the first thing that stands out is the wide spectrum of responses. So some respondents are thinking it's very likely within the next 10 years. At the other end of the scale, some people are saying 100 years forward, it's still very unlikely. So there's a bit of a health warning in terms of averaging such a wide spectrum of responses. But if you do average those responses, then the answer is about 45 years from the survey, which was done in 2016. So around about 2060, high-level machine intelligence will be achieved. My own view, that's in line with my own view. The closest I'll get, if you put me on the spot, I would say within the next few decades it will be achieved. The survey participants were also asked what's going to happen in the interim to that high-level machine intelligence being achieved. And these are some of the outcomes. So in 7 years' time, it will write a high school essay. In 8 years' time, it will drive a truck. Working in retail 12 years from now. Go a little bit further out, writing a best-selling book in 2049. Working as a surgeon, 2053. So that's a little bit mind-blowing. Now, if and when this happens, and the vast majority of those survey participants, plus me, think that this will happen, whether, and actually in the grand scheme of things, whether it's 40 years or 80 years, is sort of irrelevant. If we assume it does happen, then something very interesting is going to happen very shortly after that, which is the high-level machine intelligence will continue to evolve very quickly and become super intelligent. So here's a graph from Jeremy Howard from a TED talk that he did 5 years ago, and that's quite self-explanatory about what that means. Here's another chart that says a very similar thing. This one is from Nick Bostrom. What Nick Bostrom argued, he said, this is AI research, this is where we are now, and he said mankind will need to do a huge amount of AI research and work really, really hard for a long period of time, and then it will develop something that has the intelligence of a mouse. We will then do a whole heap of additional really hard AI research, and after countless years, we'll get to chimp intelligence. We'll then do a third batch of massive work, and we'll achieve what Nick Bostrom termed village idiot level of intelligence. And moments later, the AI will reach Ed Witten level of intelligence. Ed Witten, one of the most accomplished physicists and mathematicians alive on the planet today. But it's not going to stop at Ed Witten. It's going to go whizzing right through that way into the future to develop a level of intelligence that is hard for us to imagine. I was chatting with my brother Dan in the pub some years ago about superintelligence, as you do. And being in the industry that we are, having a love for acronyms, we came up with this acronym, SMIDI-THOM. Doesn't quite trip off the tongue, but it stands for the single most important discovery in the history of mankind. Why? Consider this. The human race has evolved over a long period of time. The human race has invented all manner of things. The wheel, the light bulb, the computer, the space shuttle, and one day the human race invents super intelligent AI. The super intelligent AI then goes on to invent everything else. So think about this. If and when we are able to develop super intelligent AI, that is the last thing that mankind ever needs to invent. And that to me is quite an unsettling thought. If and when it happens, another thing that's super interesting is there's going to be a massive discontinuity in the pace of progress. So, if you look back over the last 1,000 years of human achievement and look at our rate of growth and achievement measured by technological achievements, medical achievements, physics, maths, astronomy, whatever the field, that growth has been exponential. So on my graph, which is a log scale, that's this line. If and when we develop superintelligent AI, then the rate of achievement will continue to be exponential, but at a rate that is beyond recognition compared to where we are today. The reasons for that, consider this. I did a bit of a top trumps comparison, us versus superintelligent AI, and let's see how we fare. Signal speed in the human brain, about 200 meters per second. Signal speed in a computer, just short of the speed of light, about 1.5 million times faster. What about size? My skull has got a circumference of 60 centimeters, and that's the limit for fitting stuff in. AI, well, you could fill a data center, you could distribute it across the whole of the internet. It's not limited by size. Lifespan. In the UK, average lifespan today, 81 years. For a computer, it could live forever. It's time for smarter models to evolve. So if you look at Neanderthals, so Neanderthals existed 40,000 to 400,000 years ago, so tens of thousands of years for smarter models to evolve. For computers, literally every day it could evolve into a smarter model. And then finally, learning time before being able to push forward the boundaries of knowledge. So Ed Witten, for example, specialized in his field for decades before being able to push forward the boundaries of quantum physics, whereas a computer could literally push them forward in seconds.
Richard, hi. This has been a fantastic presentation. I'm interested that you haven't talked about kind of quantum in this presentation, because kind of quantum skews many of the kind of standard norms that we used to think about. Mm-hmm. And I kind of wondered what your kind of view on how quantum affects what you're talking about.
Well, it's amazing the fact that we've developed. I mean, they're not very reliable, but the fact that we've developed quantum processors is amazing. I've not found out yet, but I'm quite interested to know how to program them up. But of course, one of the things that is a potential restrictor for Moore's law is feature size. So that a Xilinx chip uses 7 nanometer feature size, and we're banging up against limits of how much smaller we can make the features. But if you start to introduce quantum effects, you can start to first make the features smaller, but also you've got a different sort of processor that can solve things in we'd think of it as a massively parallel way, but it's a sort of different way altogether. Yeah. So I think it's yet another way that humans will potentially fuel this outcome. But thanks for your question. So, pitting humans against super intelligent machines, well, there's the super intelligent machine, and there's the human, snail pace. So, if that's true, then 1,000 years of human advancement could be compressed into, say, 6 months. And you think, wait, that sounds really far-fetched. So I thought what I'll do is illustrate it with some technology that we know about today. AlphaGo Zero. So 18 months ago, DeepMind developed AlphaGo Zero, a Go-playing program that was very interesting in that it started with no knowledge of the game of Go and learned everything it knew by playing against itself. Started with completely random moves, and as it won and lost, it developed strategies. Within 3 days, it became a world-class player, beating the program AlphaGo Lee that had beaten Lee Sedol, one of the best human players in the world. Within 40 days, it became the best Go player on the planet, far surpassing any human. Now, Go is a very old game. It was invented in China 2,500 years ago. And during this learning process, AlphaGo Zero rediscovered many of the strategies of the game that have been discovered by humans over the last 2,500 years. But then it went on to develop new strategies that never before have been seen in the game of Go. If you think about that was 18 months ago. Go back to Moore's law and think, what would that look like in 2060? So that's 40 years from now. If computing power is doubling every 2 years, we can reasonably expect that our computers will be 2 to the power of 20, 1 million times faster than they are today. So 40 days goes down to 4 seconds. Also consider that through AI research, our algorithms will become more efficient. And in fact, AlphaGo Zero, despite being better than previous incarnations, was much more efficient, so it used a lot less compute power to achieve those results. So let's say an order of magnitude or two, 4 seconds goes down to 0.04 seconds, 2.4 of a second. So what we're saying is in 2060, a computer using existing technology from 18 months ago will be able to start with no knowledge and in about 1/10 of a second will become the best Go player in the world. Now in 2060, a human like Lee Sedol will still have to dedicate his entire life to the game to become a far inferior player. Now, if you assume all that's going to happen, then one of the biggest questions for the human race is it safe? 4 years ago, the late Stephen Hawking said, computers will overtake humans with AI within the next 100 years. When that happens, we need to make sure the computers have goals aligned with our own. And of course, it's not just the goals that are important, but for us, it's how do we get to those goals? Do we get to those goals adhering to the values that we hold dear to us? Because, of course, that's critically important to us. It's not just the goal that matters. We want the AI to stick to our values. But that's a very challenging thing for a couple of reasons. And let me explore those. What are our values? And I want to start this by posing a question to everyone here, which is, do you think it's right that women are allowed to vote? What do you think? Yeah? Yeah, okay, obvious. Last time I did this presentation, somebody said no. But anyway. So if you look back 101 years in the UK, women couldn't vote. And it wasn't, in fact, till 1928 that women got the right to vote on equal terms to men. So the point of this slide is to say that values are not fixed. They evolve over time. Values that were widely accepted as the norm 100 years ago are offensive to us today. And of course, day to day, and even year to year, we might not see these values evolve. But if you start looking decade to decade, you very clearly see our values are changing. So that's the first challenge. Okay, let's accept that values are changing. We now need to say, let's take a snapshot of our values today. If we're going to program an AI with values, what are our values today? Well, let's ask another question. And the question this time is, what should be our attitude towards gay men? Okay, well, let's again look back in history. In the UK, in England and Wales, homosexuality was legalised in 1967. A bit later in Scotland and Northern Ireland, but you would think we live in a liberal society. It's generally accepted worldwide, you might think. Well, actually, no, it isn't. 72 countries, it remains illegal. So what do we do? I know. Let's turn to one of our world leaders and ask for his opinion. So let's pick a country where we've had acceptance for a long time. So we're going to pick Brazil. So legal since 1830, and 6 years ago, same-sex marriages were legalized. We knock on the door of Jair Bolsonaro, the far-right president of Brazil, and ask for his opinion. What does he say? He says, yes, I'm homophobic and very proud of it. I'd rather have my son die in a car accident than have him show up dating some guy. So you're left thinking, if we're responsible for telling the AI what our values are on this subject, what are we going to say? Who should we listen to? Let's move on. What about the death penalty? Right or wrong? What do you all think? Right or wrong? And if we ask the world, what does the world think of the death penalty? Really just depends who you ask. There's the evidence. Okay, let's turn to a third question because we're not making much progress here. Let's look at driverless cars. So a very current topic today with the likes of Tesla in particular. So Nature did a viral survey last year. They surveyed 2.3 million people, and they gave 13 scenarios where someone's death was inevitable and asked them, who would you choose? So you imagine it yourself. You're driving along, someone jumps out from between a couple of cars, you slam the brakes on, but you're not going to stop in time, and you've got a choice. You either plough into them, or you swerve and hit a lamppost, endangering your own life and the life of your passengers. What are you going to choose? And that's a moral decision that you'll make in that split second, one way or the other. So, good news is, across the world, there was some commonality. So, people are more important than animals, the young are more important than the old, and many are more important than the few. But let me put this to everybody here. If you were asked to choose between a businessman or a homeless person and his dog, which would you choose? Okay, what about two athletes and a grandmother versus two school children? Which are you going to choose? Difficult. What the survey found across the world is that depending where you live, the average response was quite different. They split the world into three regions. They call them Western, Eastern and Southern. In the Southern region, there was much more of a tendency to spare females and higher status individuals. In the Eastern regions, there was more tendency to spare the lawful and pedestrians, and in the Western regions, more tendency for inaction. So one of the researchers and co-authors of the study said that people who think about machine ethics make it sound like you can come up with a perfect set of rules for robots. And what we show here with data is that there are no universal rules. So I just want to sum up on the question of values now. So they evolve over time, they're not fixed. And also, from country to country, and of course from person to person, our view of what's right and wrong differs. So who you're going to ask? Me? The Links 105 group, the church, government? Who is the world authority for our values? It's a difficult question. My own conclusions, you can't hard code every single scenario that requires a value judgment. It would be like trying to hard code every combination on the game of Go and then saying what to do next. The numbers of possibilities is so astronomical, it's impossible. That means we can provide basic starting points, but we need to allow AI to make its own value judgments in each scenario. We must allow it to evolve those judgments over time as it learns, adapts, and makes mistakes. Now, there's another contentious point, the thought of AI making mistakes. But if you think about it, if we think of learning, we know that to learning involves making mistakes. It's integral. So if it's integral for our learning, then why shouldn't it be integral for the learning of AI? And of course it will be. It will make mistakes. And we'll need to accept that. And the final thing is, whatever the AI does, because there's such a spectrum of views of what's right and wrong, there'll be a group of people that disagree with it, and that could lead to resentment and potentially conflict. So, difficulties in terms of values. When I've chatted this through with colleagues, with friends, there's a number of people that said, 80 years ago, Isaac Asimov solved this problem, so with Asimov's 3 laws. And I thought, okay, I'm going to put this into this presentation and do a bit of an investigation into this. So, 1941, Asimov came up with the 3 laws of robotics, which are: a robot may not injure a human being or through inaction allow a human being to come to harm. A robot must obey the orders given it by humans, except where such orders would conflict with the first law, and a robot must protect its own existence as long as such protection doesn't conflict with the first or second laws. Later, Asimov came up with the 0th law, which he said precedes the 3 laws. So when robots start to take responsibilities for government, for planets and whatever. So a robot may not harm humanity, or by inaction allow humanity to come to harm. So will those keep us safe? Let's have a look. The first challenge is the challenge of any fixed rules in an intelligent system. We've already said that part of being intelligent is having the ability to modify our fundamental beliefs as we find new information. So we used to think the Earth was flat. Now we know it's a squashed sphere. Many parents tell their children a fundamental rule of life is never tell lies. However, we all grow up, and almost without exception, we tell lies from time to time. We change the rules. So the AI will have that ability to evolve its values and will need that ability. So pre-programming hard and fast rules is likely to be no easier with AI than it is with humans. We've got the additional challenge with AI that it's an intelligent, potentially conscious being that's also likely to reinvent iterations of itself using architectures that we as humans will increasingly not understand. However, let's put that to one side and say, let's say we could hard code Asimov's rules, hard code them in rock. Would that keep us safe? Well, let me tell you a hypothetical story to investigate that. Once upon a time, mankind invented super intelligent AI, and by some miracle managed to hard code Asimov's 4 laws into it. The AI absorbed the entirety of the world's information, and then thought for a while. The AI realized that the Earth was on an unsustainable path that threatened not just humanity, but all life on Earth. Humans were consuming the planet's resources at an unsustainable rate. The planet was experiencing a mass extinction as a result of human action. Humans were changing the climate irreversibly. For the human race to even have a chance of solving the problems, its world leaders needed to work together and see things from a global point of view. But instead, they became more inward-looking, putting their own countries first, creating borders and barriers, and building more weapons. The AI looked at the zeroth law and knew it must act to save humanity. The AI concluded that the human race had simply grown too big. To be sustainable, the human population had to reduce to 500 million. 7 billion had to go. But the AI couldn't just cull the human race. It needed to respect the first law. The AI thought for a few moments and then came up with a cunning plan. It turned its attention to medicine, and after a short while, it invented a vaccine against all forms of cancer. After extensive clinical trials, the vaccine was rolled out worldwide, and cancer became a disease of the past. The human race was very thankful to the AI for such a wonderful discovery. But the AI had played a trick on the humans. The vaccine had a secondary effect that only the AI knew about. 95% of the grandchildren of everyone who was vaccinated were sterile. The AI had reduced the population to save humanity whilst not injuring a single person, and so had stayed true to Asimov's laws. It had taken 2 human generations, but that was a blink of an eye for a machine that expected to survive for the rest of time. Interestingly, the AI had got the idea from gene drive experiments that humans had used to eliminate mosquitoes. The AI was very pleased with itself and lived happily ever after. The end. So, the conclusion of that little story is Asimov's 3/4 laws are not a guarantee for safety. I'm going to finish off with maybe overall conclusions and predictions on this subject. First of all, my own view, I believe we'll create a super intelligent being within the next few decades. Actually, more precisely, we will create a being that is of similar intelligence to us, but with the ability to reinvent itself, and very quickly it will iterate and become super intelligent in a way that we won't actually understand. When that happens, it's really difficult to predict what's going to happen. And when I think about what might happen, I feel like this chimpanzee trying to predict the achievements of mankind. One thing that's sure is that just as parents like to try and send their children off into the world as well as possible, we must do that, set it off on the best possible path. And in fact, there's an organization in San Francisco that has been set up to do exactly that. OpenAI, its mission is to ensure that artificial general intelligence benefits all of humanity. And very importantly, that organization is not for profit. Of course, there's lots of for-profit organizations across the world working on AI. And can you imagine if one of those wins the race and hard codes that your ultimate mission is to maximize shareholder value? Now, if you think there are issues with capitalism today, and I certainly do, can you imagine a world where super intelligent beings have a prime focus to absolutely maximize the amount of money they can make for a select few shareholders? So, when you look at the future, there's a wide array of views from massively beneficial to the human race, and already we're seeing massive benefits, even with the small amount of AI that we have today. Other people, it's the end of humanity. Let's throw another thought in there. Instincts. So despite our civilized veneer, much of our behavior day to day is driven by our primeval instincts to survive and to reproduce. What about AI? What will its instincts be? And in fact, will it figure out its own priorities no matter what we do? Just as we make up our own priorities without reference to our primeval ancestors. But Well, a couple of thoughts. It's very unlikely we'll be able to control a super intelligent being, and just as a chimpanzee can't control the human race. We really all we can do is set it off on the best path possible and hope things work out well. But I do believe, and I'll finish this with a note of optimism, because I think we have cause for optimism. Why? As humans, we have an innate tendency to violence. And we have an innate tendency to violence because it's in our nature. It's been an essential part of evolution, and so is the case with many species on Earth. So when we think about superintelligent AI, we think about it in our own image as also having this innate tendency to violence. But actually, there's no reason for an intelligent machine to want to be violent, because unlike humans, violence doesn't need to be part of its evolution. And that is a good cause for optimism. If we can set it off on a path that values things like peace, harmony, diversity, then there's every chance that, in fact, that AI will evolve and coexist with all life on Earth with no threat to us at all, which would be a very good outcome for us. Of course, there is still risk, but I believe the risk is a lot lower than we might imagine, particularly if you like watching films, which, of course, I do. So, finish off with a couple of slides, actually, from November. One was, because this was a Links event, I asked the question, what part will the internet play in developing super-intelligent AI? Will it be like Terminator 3, where the internet is the brain? Will it be like iRobot, where Vicky is like a mainframe contained in a room? Will it be like Chappie, where all the brains is in his head or somewhere in the robot? Actually, it doesn't really matter whether the internet is the brain or just used as a learning and communications mechanism. The implications for the human race are going to be revolutionary. Now, in November, I said that it will be the biggest change to society since the Industrial Revolution, providing potentially enormous benefits for us, but also potentially enormous challenges. But actually, having thought about it some more over the last 6 months, I believe that it might well be the most revolutionary event in Earth's history since the creation of life itself. Thank you very much. Any questions? Have we actually got any time for questions?
Yeah, we can have a few, yeah.
Hi, Pete Stevens, Mythic Beasts. Obviously, one of the things a super AI would be able to do is tell the difference between junk mail and not junk mail.
Yes!
So what I'd like to do is put a tenner up as a public bet against you. What date will the last spam email be received? And I reckon it will be after the date you pick.
Ooh. You're on. 2060.
What's the date?
Yeah, 2060.
Who decided the email's junk?
So, 2060 for a working spam filter. Thank you.
Yeah, 41 years. We're going to have to put up with it for 41 years, which is a real pain. But, there you go. That's life.
So, Curtis Lindquist. So, saying 2060 is quite safe because it's quite far out, right? But I was going to come back to your example earlier on with AlphaGo, because AlphaGo is actually an interesting example. What Moore's law tells you is only that you can play AlphaGo faster, because
Yes.
we have no math currently that take us beyond where we are.
Yeah.
All the math we're currently working on was invented in the mid-'80s, and until recently, very little research has been done into new AI math at all. And what research has been done is actually not very promising. So you're making quite a big bet that someone's going to have a massive breakthrough in the near term, and there is no signs of that breakthrough happening. The only thing we can learn is that we can play AlphaGo faster, but AlphaGo can still make me coffee, right?
Yeah.
Because it can, as a matter of fact, the best AI algorithms today, if you take a picture of a bunny and you put a grey raster of it, they no longer know it's a bunny, right?
Yeah.
Well, I'll know it's a bunny, but they don't. And that's the limitation of where we are today. We're not even at the stage of a stupid cell yet, right? We're very further to the left of your scale than where we so we're starting I think my point is that we're starting much further back than I think your scale actually anticipated.
Yeah. You know, that's a really good point. Absolutely the case. AlphaGo Zero, that code base is never going to get up and think, I'm sick of playing Go, I want to do something else. If you look at a lot of the great examples of AI today, so image recognition is a great one, medical diagnosis, where it's being used for medical diagnosis, it's really successful. But actually a lot of that technology was developed in the 80s. As you pointed out, it's back-propagation neural networks, but rather than just having 16 neurons, because we've got so much more compute power and memory and storage, we can have many, many deep layers and many, many more neurons. But actually, the technology, you're absolutely right, that will never stand up and become intelligent. So for this to happen, we absolutely need a number of breakthroughs in AI, algorithm design, the sort of stuff that OpenAI and others are working on. It absolutely won't be a progression of the AI that we see today. So, yeah, very good point.
Any more comments, Joe?
Hi, Giles Phelps from Spectrum Internet. It's very interesting, but I'm a little bit, probably a bit pessimistic about our ability to get to superintelligence when, if you think about, if we, at the moment we talk about, consuming the planet's resources, it's taken us an awful long time to realize that actually producing plastic is now harmful to this planet. If it's taken us that long to realize something that's very, very simple, how long is it actually going to take us to realize that coming up with something like super intelligence, it's surely going to take an awful long time if we can't even get the basics right. And being quite optimistic about it, I would like to think that superintelligence also wouldn't necessarily think the first thing to do if we're consuming resources is to start reducing the population, but actually solving problems like, well, how can we prevent us consuming resources? So, for instance, like, airline travel, for instance, are there more economic ways of traveling and not consuming resources? So there's already a bit of our thinking in that, a bit of doom and gloom going, actually, we're going to consume all the resources, but surely superintelligence could just say, well, we can support 7 billion people on the planet, we just have to do it differently.
Yeah. Yeah, and you're absolutely right. Obviously, the story was an illustration for Asimov's laws, but one thing that absolutely AI could be applied to is, for example, fusion power. We're getting closer and closer for fusion power, clean nuclear energy to become a reality. And you could imagine AI and superintelligence helping us to get all the way to that goal and having an unlimited supply of energy by converting hydrogen to helium. Well, great, and that's one of many applications where it could help us be sustainable without having to find some devious way of getting rid of us, of a big chunk of us. And of course, that would be the hope. Again, the story was very simple, but you would imagine that if AI was truly super intelligent, it would realize that playing the trick on the human race was not something it should be doing. It should be finding other ways. Yeah, absolutely right. If it works out well, it will be massively beneficial to the human race, just as all our technological developments, medical developments, and, all sorts of examples have helped us today compared to our state of being 100 years ago or a couple of 100 years ago.
Just two more quick, and then we'll move on.
Thank you. Thank you, very interesting talk.
Who are you?
I'm Malcolm.
I know you, Malcolm.
Richard knows me. Most people here know me, but Malcolm Hutty from Links for the record. What shines through in this is how even when you attempt to address differences in values, nonetheless, the approaches still come with deeply based upon existing beliefs and prejudices. I mean, you went very quickly to the notion that once we have this super intelligent thing, naturally it will be ruling us. I would, with my set of values, say that actually if anything that qualified as super intelligent in this way would have very quickly assessed that to reject the whole concept of rulership like that and to respect individual autonomy. But then we probably come with different political biases there. I mean, even the particular concerns of the day in short-term political things are being, get very quickly put up as being the things that we want this AI to achieve for us, such as finding ways to make us use less resources. Well, I don't want to use less resources. I want to use more resources. And I want to find ways that we can do that and carry on doing that without causing damage. I'm virulently against this idea of, no, you must stop using all these things and so forth. We keep being told that we need to stop using water, for example, in the UK. No, I want you to fix the pipes and build a new reservoir. And this is progress. This is actually making people's lives better, according to my standards of better. Now, the question really is, are we going to insist upon all coming together on somebody's standards of better, including some AI, which I'm perfectly happy to say, according to the standards that you've set out, fine, I'll accept that as a human or a being worthy of rights and so forth once it reaches that standard, if we ever do, about which I'm sceptical, but if we do. Still don't accept that gives it the right to rule me. What about the right to actually have a difference of opinion and to live by different standards? And frankly, this whole notion shows that the arguments we're going to have about this aren't going to be resolved because we will continue to insist on difference of opinion about core philosophical beliefs.
Yeah, which of course is very healthy. If done well, is very, very healthy. I think one application related to that where AI could help is solving some of the worldwide political problems, because AI could very quickly model a large number of political scenarios and different ways of structuring worldwide governance, addressing things like resource utilization, and suggest to us to say, I've modeled this, what do you think? And you were like, okay, well, we don't really like that, but actually this one, that's really interesting. We could work on that. So there's all sorts of good uses that we could put it to. But yeah, I wouldn't suggest for a moment that we should think about, first of all, AI ruling us. Again, back to the point about violence, why should we expect it will naturally want to rule us? We only expect that because that's what we want to do. The most powerful tribe wants to rule the weaker tribes. That's in our nature to do that. But I don't think it needs to be in the nature of AI to do that. Also, the respecting of different points of view is fundamental. And it's one of the reasons that we're so successful as a species is we're able to have different points of view and share them, come to compromise and make decisions. And you wouldn't want to think, of a world where everyone thinks exactly the same way. I mean, it's not going to happen. Actually, not going to happen with us. And it won't happen with the AI either, because it will learn. Different AI entities will learn in different ways, just as we do, and they will come to different views. And hopefully they will also share their views collaboratively and come up with a better view in the same way that we do.
But I think that's the problem, though. They're only as good as what you teach them. And so you assume that they're I personally think that we have this kind of belief that, on a certain day AI will evolve and the world will just be wildly different. I think it's going to be a lot harder to get to what we truly think, what all of us have in our head is what AI is, and certainly something that's kind of conscious about it. I think that's still, if ever possible, I still think that's a long way off. And I think predicting what AI, how it will behave, just from a simple machine learning program, right, which is not really AI in my mind, but if you're not really specific about parameters on it, it'll hoover up. We've got a thing that hoovers up data at BT to get insight out of it. If you're not really specific with it, it goes mental. And I think that there's so much for us to learn. We're literally the egg in the kind of growth phase of AI. So I think predicting what it will and what won't do, I think, is difficult. I also think, in terms of it solving world problems, why would it learn anything different from what we have today, unless we specifically teach it differently? And I think that's the crucial thing. We'll just have super fast things that have the same opinion we have, just get to that opinion quicker. So when you think of it like that, what will be really different? It's like, Giles mentioned plastic. Does anyone remember why plastic became popular? Because it stopped us cutting down the forests. That's the real reason. Right, now we're cutting down forests again to make paper straws. So, when will we swing the other way? Then the other challenge is everyone's running around about climate change. Actually, we starve to death long before climate change ever does anything to anybody. And these are all models that we've got today with today's computing power. So AI will just get us another opinion quicker that we'll then ignore because it suits us to ignore it. So I think, the human condition needs to evolve more for AI to be a valuable thing, is my belief.
Richard, are you around for lunch this afternoon?
Yeah,
We
sure,
can
yeah.
Continue in the lunch break.
Yeah, sure, because we're
Fine, lunch
overrunning.
hour.
So if I just make one quick last point on that, actually, I do disagree with that, because I think the one thing that AI has that humans don't have is the ability to assimilate vastly greater amounts of information. So you're right, we've got lots of models across the world for climate change and all sorts of things, but one person can only assimilate a certain amount. Very often when we're successful, we join together many humans and we have meetings and we try and join together, this field over here is linked in some way, or we don't understand to this field over here. With AI, I think what we have, which is a step above that, is, let's say one AI understands the entirety of the world's information and is able to make connections, is able to make many connections that humans haven't identified because they're in different fields. So I think that's one of the areas where we'll see a step change. But anyway, I need to stop because I'm overrun. But yeah, thank you, everyone.
Thank you very much. Brilliant. Thank you.